Awesome, we're live. So it's going to take a few seconds for people to sign in and start watching. But I see the countdown this time, so that should mean the sound is on.
Cool.
I'm even going to check it.
Yeah, let's just check the sound. Maybe I can check on my own computer. I can check like right from here.
You don't want to sign in on your Facebook from there. I don't want to mess up things and sign me off.
Okay.
I got it from here. Don't worry, I'm signing on my account.
Cool.
So yeah, go ahead. You start your live. People are on.
People are on?
I think so.
Can we just get, can you all hear me? Can we just get a confirmation on the sound? Mic check. I just want to make sure that everything's working before I start lecturing. Last time I started talking and I pretty much just gave a whole lecture without recording any of it because the sound didn't work. So sorry we're running late. We're still getting the technical setup together here. But as soon as we get confirmation on the sound, I'll launch right in and I'll just go back over the introduction to the lost science of money, as well as the first chapter on the origins of monetary systems, which covers different monetary systems used in the ancient Oriental cities, Samaria, Egypt, and Assyria, and then how things started to change in the Greek city-states. And that's when, we start to see gold becoming used as money, whereas before that it had more to do with life. Money was based on something alive, like, seed or cows or something like that. So, all right, I'm getting the thumbs up. Sounds like you're hearing me.
Sound is good, it says.
Sound is good. All right, awesome. Cool. So, check out greensformonetaryreform.org in the history tab. This is our home base. We owe a major, major debt of gratitude to Sue, Will, Don, Ann, Martin, all who organized this material and studied it together for quite some time before putting it all together on this website. There's a few other people who took the class as well. Jeff, who passed away, Lisa, as well as Fran Bowitt from Positive Money UK. And Positive Money UK did a really, really good job. They played an instrumental role in forcing the British Parliament to hold hearings on monetary reform, which is something we want our Congress to do as well. So this history class, this online history class that I'm going to be leading us through now is designed to gather some weekly momentum towards that end, towards actually holding hearings on how money is created in this country. And of course that we want to do with the eye towards holding hearings on the National Emergency Employment Defense Act, the NEAT Act. And this would end the economic recession as we all know it. This would end wage slavery in this country as we know it. This would set up universal education, universal health care, fully funded political elections, livable wage jobs, setting up a green new energy infrastructure, et cetera, et cetera. So, anyway, the National Emergency Employment Defense Act is the official monetary plank of the Green Party. If only Jill Stein would have spoken about the NEAT Act on John Oliver's show, she wouldn't have gotten dissed by him for talking about free college, because the NEAT Act is what would pay for universal education from here on out. So, if you click on the class materials section, you'll get a list of all the chapters from the Lost Science of Money. And just click on the capitalism part here. There's one little document, actually I already have it open, where we just give our definition of capitalism. And the essential feature of capitalism is macro usury, misuse of the money system, the privatization of the money system. We don't want private banks, private commercial banks to control our money system anymore. Whenever they make loans to individuals, corporations, or government, that money is created, and all the interest goes to those private banks. So we define this debt usury as the most essential feature of capitalism, and it's completely missing from the study and the definition of capitalism by leftist thinkers all the way from Marx all the way up to Noam Chomsky. And I just wanted to point out Noam Chomsky's discussion on the definition of capitalism in order to show you how this monetary reform movement is distinct from the rest of the left. So Noam Chomsky was a huge voice of reason for me during 9/11, as I'm sure he was for a lot of other people. Got a lot of respect for his work, even in the field of linguistics, with his work on deep structures and his activist stuff on manufacturing consent. All very important stuff to read. But if you, I'm not going to play the clip, but if you listen to him talk about capitalism and how he defines capitalism, it's not terribly clear compared to our definition as macro usury. He describes it as oppressive, hierarchical, totalitarian. He uses the old Marxist phrase, the private ownership of the means of production. But this is all fairly vague. I don't disagree with any of that, but he doesn't talk about debt. He doesn't talk about money at all. It's missing from his analysis. Moreover, Chomsky contradicts himself oftentimes. In Death of the American Dream, I recall he argued that we don't have a capitalist system, that the banks should have failed if we were living in a true capitalist system. And so you'll hear Chomsky argue about how we don't have a real capitalist system, we have a state-run capitalist system. The state backs up the business interests. Like there's Adam Smith's invisible hand is really just the hand of the state propping capitalist systems up. And so Chomsky also talks about alternative to capitalism, all really good talks. And he's really into what he calls self-managed or worker-managed enterprises. He's talking about co-ops. And obviously this is definitely a viable alternative to capitalism. The Mondragon co-ops in Spain being the most prominent example. And the thing about that's interesting, the thing that I like about co-ops is, whereas Marxists would say, let's go occupy the means of production, the anarchists sort of say, let's just build our own. Let's outcompete the capitalists at their own game. I like that approach. And to that extent, I tried starting a co-op once. It was called the Occupy Money Cooperative. You can Google it. It made a lot of press. It made the New York Times. I believe it made Bloomberg and some other stuff. And we made $10,000 to start this cooperative, which would have been a very low-cost financial institution for the 99% that would have offered a lot of low-cost financial services. The thing is, though, even though we didn't make enough money to get the whole co-op started, the thing about these self-managed enterprises is that they require lots of workers who already have money to invest into the co-op. And it requires a huge education project on top of that. You have to teach people, the bylaws, how to participate within the co-op. It takes a lot of work to build these things, and I'm all for it. But even if we do get co-ops set up, that would still only help the banks make more money. If our co-ops are based on debt-based currency, creating a worker-owned co-op like a Mondragon here in the States ultimately would only contribute more towards the national debt. It would only contribute towards an inflated monetary supply, and it wouldn't create the kind of long-term economic stability that we're all fighting for here. So the other thing that Chomsky says that I've come to disagree with in light of having read Stephen Zarlenga's book is on the Fed. You can check this clip out here. Noam Chomsky loves the Federal Reserve. And, he's asked, about returning the power of printing money to the American people or to the people of the U.S. And Chomsky says that this is misguided. You know, we believe that the power of printing money, the money power, is the ultimate means of appropriation. Money is what pays for other means of production. You know, money is how you can't build a factory or a co-op without money. How is money produced? Chomsky's analysis isn't radical enough. He doesn't ask how money is created in this country. And that's exactly what we want to force our Congress to do. And please, if I'm wrong, if Chomsky does talk about this somewhere, please comment. You know, please leave some links in the comment sections. And please reach out to Noam Chomsky and tell him that, look, there's other alternatives. In this world, we don't have to end the Fed. We can nationalize the Fed. Chomsky argues that we'd be in a much greater economic recession right now if it weren't for the Federal Reserve. In Chapter 20 of The Lost Science of Money, we'll take a look at Stephen Zarlenga's arguments as to how the Federal Reserve actually helped create the first economic depression, and, you know, this one as well. So, please encourage Chomsky to consider nationalizing the Fed. Please tell him about the National Emergency Employment Defense Act. So, moving on. So the intro of this book needs to be read as well. There's a lot of important stuff in here. We get the basic themes of the lost science of money. So we just talked about capitalism, extreme concentration of wealth, debt being the secret key ingredient to our current economic enslavement. And so the primary thesis of this book has to do with the importance of money power. Over time, whoever controls the money system controls the nation. Zarlenga writes, it's a good quote I like here, monetary decisions will most directly impact citizens' daily lives more so than the activities of Congress, the President, or the judiciary. Monetary decisions determine how money is made available in the community and who gets it, whether it finances industry and more environmentally friendly production and much needed infrastructure, or goes into speculation and other forms of corruption. It will determine levels of employment and unemployment, incomes, interest rates, and much more. It will shape healthcare and education and even the arts. It will continue to determine whether the home population is protected from biological and other attack or is left to fend for itself. So our thesis is that by misdefining the nature of money, special interest groups, the bankers, have often been able to assume the control of society's monetary system and in turn society itself. This is why there's never enough money for the people, for the 99%. This is why there's always money for war, you know, or for jails, but not for schools or for healthcare. So, nature of money has been purposely kept secret and confused. This book will show you how the battle to control money power, and money power has changed a lot over the course of time. You know, we're going to see how it goes from living things like cows and seed, or cows and corn, to coin, lifeless, inanimate objects, and eventually all the way up to credit. So, if we define money as wealth, the wealthy will control society. If we define it as credit, the lenders will be in control. But if we define it as Aristotle did, as an abstract legal power, then the government can control it to promote the general welfare. And we're going to look at an example of how societies function when money is defined as a legal power. So another important thing here is that the economics profession completely ignores monetary history. Alexander Del Mar has charged Adam Smith and others for completely leaving the study of money out. I also think that this book should actually be called the lost history of money. But, I think the bigger point to be made by calling it the lost science of money is that history is way more scientific than economics as we currently practice it. It can be done well. Check out Kaoru Yamaguchi's model of HR 2990. He has an economic model of how the NEED Act will impact our local United States and global economies. So this is also very important. Do we have a question? Anything? I'll keep going then. So the economics profession doesn't teach the science of money. We have some evidence for how the banking system actually works from a few sources. This is one from a central banker from Canada. Pull it out. You can find it here. Sorry. If you click on class readings, Gerald Grattan McGreer interviews Graham Towers about bank credit. I'm going to open. So, this is from Graham F. Towers, Governor of the Central Bank of Canada from 1934 to 1955. And he testified before the Canadian government's Committee on Banking and Commerce in 1939. It's a long interview. But this is from the Mayor of Vancouver, clearly knew what he was talking about. There's no question about it that the banks create the medium of exchange. That's right. That's what they are there for. That is the banking business. The same way that a steel plant makes steel. The manufacturing process consists of making a pen and ink or typewriter entry on a card in a book. That is all. That's how money gets made. Each and every time a bank makes a loan or purchases securities, new bank credit is created, new deposits, brand new money. Broadly speaking, all new money comes out of a bank in the form of loans. As loans are debt, then under the present system, all money is debt. When $1 million worth of bonds is created, given to the bank, $1 million of new money is equivalent, or is created. Same thing if it goes to a government, a private individual, a corporation. It's all that debt is what circulates in our society for money. In that sense, they are actual money, but as a matter of fact, they are not actual money, but credit, bookkeeping accounts which are used as a substitute for money. Then we authorize the banks to issue a substitute for money. Yes, that is a very fair statement of banking. So this is a great interview. You can read more of it. Obviously, this isn't just a Canadian issue. This is how things work in the United States as well. And you don't have to be a rocket scientist to figure it out. These two people weren't. Thomas Edison and Henry Ford, two arch capitalists of this country who probably destroyed our environment more so than any two other people, they actually were able to figure this out. They figured out that our system is based on mass usury. They also understood, here's Ford talking about how the cause of all wars is gold. And he talked about how his plant, Muscle Shoals, he talked about how it was possible to start using actual wealth instead of gold as the basis of our currency. The essential evil of gold in its relation to war is the fact that it can be controlled. Break the control, you stop war. The only way to break control of these international bankers, the way to end their exploitation of humanity forever, is to smash gold as the basis of the currency of the world. But what have you to substitute? That's where Henry Ford's plan comes in. He understood how sovereign currency was better for business and for his business specifically. instead of Congress going to the central bankers to borrow money, now they could just spend it directly and give it directly to Henry Ford's plant in order to circulate money into the economy. So the government could basically just give it directly to his workers. Now, I see a way by which our government can get this great work completed without paying a nickel to the money sellers. It is as sound as granite, and there's but one thing hard about it. It's so simple and easy that maybe some folks can't see it. And then down here, Edison has some good quotes as well. So Ford here is talking about how money will be sent right into building a dam for his plant. And people in the United States will have all that they put into Muscle Shoals and all that they can take out for centuries. The endless wealth-making power of the Tennessee River, with no tax and no increase in the national debt. But what if Congress doesn't do this then? They asked Edison. Then Congress must fall back on the old way of doing business, which is what we still have. It must authorize an issue of bonds, that is, it must go out to the money brokers and borrow enough of our own national currency to complete great national resources. And we must pay interest to the money brokers for the use of our own money. That is to say, under the old way, anytime we wish to add to the national wealth, we are compelled to add to the national debt. Ford thought this was stupid. So, it's a great article. You can see how this is better for business. This isn't necessarily an anti-capitalist movement. It's an anti-debt movement. And therefore, it's a superior anti-capitalist movement. We're not content to merely fight against phrases the way Karl Marx accused the young Hegelians of doing and the way I kind of just accused Noam Chomsky of doing. So, just to underscore this whole idea, we have another deck here to go through real quick. Talks a little bit more about how we're using private bank credit as money as opposed to actual equity, as opposed to actual wealth. So, what is money? Here we're talking about what money is supposed to be. It's not supposed to be a commodity. It's not supposed to be a credit. But in our society, that's exactly what we use. A lot of people think that we make deposits to the bank and then banks loan that money out to other people. It's the total opposite. Loans, people go out, take loans, and then that's what creates new money. 97% of our monetary supply is based on private debt. Printed by the government, but not spent by the government. It's issued by the private Federal Reserve banks to member banks.
You said 97%?
Yeah.
97%.
97% of our money supply, checking deposits. Please ask Will if he's online for any further information, any further links on this, as he took the class already as well. And so the New York Federal Reserve Bank, this was implemented in 1913, and the Federal Reserve is not owned in any way by our federal government. It's got no oversight by our federal government. It's owned by all the usual suspects: Goldman Sachs, B of A, Citigroup, Deutsche, HSBC, all the banksters. So is there any questions on bank credit as money before I move on to the origins of monetary systems? Let me know if there is. So the history that we're going to be going over here is something that the economics profession, of course, ignores. And also something that's deliberately censored. In all the writings of these great and practical scholars, the workings of the mighty engine which injects the unit of exchange amongst the peoples, and without which no civilization as we know it can come to be, is only indicated by a profound silence. David asked the Babylonian Woe, and you can find a full copy of the Babylonian Woe, under the class readings section. Perhaps it's under the origins of monetary systems. This is in the next one. Oh well. Anyway. So. Here's an example of how monetary history gets censored from Stephen Zarlenga. For example, in the Athenian constitution that comes down to us, we can find out how the garbage was collected, but search in vain to learn how the Athens state coinage system operated. It was veiled in obscurity. Solon's great monetary forms can barely be pieced together from his poetry, and there's no record of his introduction of coinage into Attica. Rome offers a picture that is similarly by no means complete. So, this is a monetary interpretation of history. And monetary history is deliberately misinterpreted by Adam Smith. He insists that money has to be based on gold. We're going to see how money has been based on other things such as seeds and cattle, as well as tools. And the real purpose, of course, here is to promote H.R. 2990, the National Emergency Employment Defense Act. And I also want to point out that Dennis Kucinich is back on the anti-war warpath. He just gave a speech last month at a poverty center. I don't have the article hand. Actually, yeah, wouldn't be able to pull it up too quick. So, moving on to the origins of monetary systems then. Click on PowerPoints. Real quick, they have some really useful timelines in here. Just give us a sense of prehistory. Or not prehistory, but ancient history. So, we're looking at history and monetary history before the ancient Greek city-states. We're talking about the Paleolithic Age, when humans first appear, down to the Neolithic Age and the Bronze Ages. So from 30,000 to about 1400 BC, roughly. So in the Paleolithic Age, we're talking about Stone Age tools, hunters, gatherers. You can see major sites of Paleolithic arts. We saw a really cool documentary on Netflix another night about the cave paintings, the Shubi cave paintings, I believe. Really interesting stuff. So, Neolithic Age, we see some domestication of plants and animals, creation of the plow, and this is when we start to see some loaning of seeds and animals and tools with interest. Early monetary exchange. Moving on to the Bronze Age, this is when we see the rise of cities. This is also when we see the rise of writing. And this is when we start to see not just animals and seed, but silver, coin actually starting to be loaned with interest as well. That's an important shift. And of course, this is also when we start to see the rise of the Sumerian clay tablets, which kept accounts, the temple accounts, loans of animals and seeds and coin and so forth. So, useful info. Another timeline here that just to give you a sense of what we'll be going over after we cover those early monetary systems. Then we'll be talking about the Iron Age and Greek civilization. So from about 14 to 300 AD. Trojan War, what was that all about? Gold. 3 periods of Greek history. It's kind of basic stuff here. So from 799 to 500 BC, this is a very important period for monetary reform, because this is when we see Lycurgus of Sparta and Solon of Athens start to reform their city-states monetary systems, which have been disrupted by coinage. And this is just a good timeline of Greek history. Peloponnesian Wars. We just got done watching Alexander the Great on Netflix the other day too, and it's interesting. They talk about the word debt comes up a few times in that movie. So. So, this deck starts out just with a quick review of the major themes, how society defines money, determines who controls the money. Now we're talking about theories of the origins of money. 3 major origins. Of course, a lot of this is speculative, but the first origin, the whole idea that money originated in order to replace trade. Farmer John, the milk farmer, needed some shoes, so we went to, the smith, but the smith, didn't need the milk. It was all very confusing, so they made money in order to standardize exchange. There's very little historical evidence for that. So we can also talk about social origins of money, standardized payments for brides and blood money, for injuries and death. And then we can also talk about a religious origin, need for uniform sacrifices or dues to the gods, as well as fees to the priests. So, economists have no real proof for this whole social trading origin of money. Zarlenga writes, some economic schools promote this origin theory because they want to keep the government out of monetary decisions in the present day, and therefore prefer a market-orientated origin theory which does not depend on governmental or other institutional decisions. Of course, we can see how cattle was one very early origin of money. There's a lot of stuff that was used. Really important book called Debt, the First 5,000 Years, by an anarchist activist named David Graeber. He played a big role in the Battle of Seattle in 1999, shutting down the WTO talks. Also played a big role in bringing the General Assembly procedures to Occupy Wall Street. I was there, I met him briefly, and this is a very important book. I think this book really is critical in getting us to understand how debt is the central feature of capitalism. And there's a really good critique of this book in the class readings here. It's written by a gentleman named Bob Podiat from Texas. So this book, Debt, First 5,000 Years, is worth reading and will aid anyone to understand the evolution of money, its settlement of debt, and its conversion of debt is far more complicated than simple solution to barter with bits of precious metal. This book, of course, supports social origin of money. Graeber talks a lot about, standardized payments for brides and other rituals. Strong case is made that money was invented to pay debts or enable immediate settlement of exchange with someone with whom there was not expected to be any further association. In many cases, a coin acted as a token or a counter rather than being valuable in itself. A good argument is made that precious metals were adapted to coinage to assist armies in procurement of arms, armament, and equipment in far off places. Precious metals are portable and nearly universal, recognized as having price value. So, the biggest critique of this book, however, is that the author offers no solutions except a weak suggestion of debt forgiveness based upon the debt jubilees in ancient Sumeria. So, from a monetary reform perspective, the book, as an anthropological study, did not give enough consideration to the power assumed by entities, temples, kings, governments, etc. to control society through the control of money. This was already evident in Sumerian clay tablets and has evolved into the present private central bank monopolies that are the greatest concentration of wealth through debt in human history. But still an important book. We're going to get to Plutarch's Lycurgus in just a moment. So, this is where the religious interpretation becomes really important too. The social origins of money obviously invalidate this whole economic trading sort of origin. So we already talked about gift exchange, bride price, some of the things that would have been used, and that would have been things like shells, amber, stone, tusks, and also cows. From Ireland to the Mediterranean to Africa, cattle were used as a means of exchange and especially as a measure of value. Furthermore, they appear to have had a fairly stable value, and with 3 to 4 cows equaling 1 slave woman. Fairly standard. And this was fairly standard in the ancient Orient, which is known as Egypt, Assyria, and Sumeria. Tool money was also really important. Money would be created into tools, but not for functional use, so maybe it'd be made out of bronze in some cases. Well, not quite yet. Special shells or tusks sometimes. Different materials would be carved into tools which would be recognized as having value, and pieces of them could be broken off here and there. So we see how early money was based on food. It was animals, corn, cows, as well as tool. And so loans without interest were very common. You would loan out a cow, you would get a cow back. But sometimes if you lent out a cow, it would be returned with its offspring. Certain seeds might be returned with more seeds from the harvest. This was the beginning of interest as we know it. This is how the practice of charging more for a loan started to come about. It is presumed that in earlier agrarian society, loans had been made in seed grains, animals, and tools to farmers. Since 1 grain of seed could generate a plant with 100 new seeds, After the harvest, farmers could repay the grain with interest in grain. Similarly, when animals were loaned, they could be repaid with interest in the form of sharing in any new animals born. The Sumerians used the same word, mas, M-A-S, for both calves and interest. A similar Egyptian word meant to give birth. What was loaned thus had the power of generation, and interest was a sharing of the result. So interest had more to do with sharing than it did with payment, which is important. Of course, it wasn't terribly common. So the temples had a very important role in maintaining, large tracts of land, flocks, and tools. So in ancient Babylon, we start to see for the first time the legal system being supported by metals, by silver shells. And so something interesting happened in this period. These shells started to be treated as if they were the same as cows or seeds, as if they could generate more of themselves. But this was a major conceptual error in ancient times. We call this the usury error. This whole idea that inorganic metals can reproduce themselves, and therefore charging, if we loan money, charging more money back on that's something that comes from the ancient practice of loaning food and animals and tools out as money. See if you can get Will to comment a little bit more on the usury error. And so the money power was the prerogative of the temples. The clay tablets, of course, from Sumeria recorded early loans of seeds, animals, as well as money. And this is the other interesting thing. You can see how in the ancient world, what we would call complementary currencies would have been more common, with slave women being equivalent to cows, and one cow being equivalent to 140 gold talents. So people could be put to death for not recording financial transactions. And the result of this error would be really huge. Expecting people to pay money back, expecting people to pay more coins back than what they had borrowed, would start putting people into debt traps, especially if the harvest was bad. Families would actually start pawning off their flocks, their fields, their wives, and their children would all be sold into prostitution. David Graeber writes a lot about that in Debt, the first 5,000 years. And then, eventually kings would declare periodic debt forgiveness. They'd wash the tablets clean. And this meant that families could come back together, people could go home. And this was a way in which people would actually gain power in ancient Sumeria. That's how a king would take control. So the cults of these early civilizations continued to create money power. And we're going to see how this usury error continued into ancient Greece. Are there any questions at the moment, however? The usury error is like the main thing to understand at this point, though. This transition from live money, from cows and seed, to metal. It makes sense to charge interest if you're dealing with live money, but it doesn't at all if you're dealing with coinage. Okay, so now on to ancient Rome. Ancient Greece. talking about gold. This is when gold started becoming money. So remember we talked about the exchange standard between cows and gold. One cow is worth 130 grains of Troy gold by weight. And how did this happen? Gold was the easiest metal for people to obtain, easier compared to copper or silver, which would have been the hardest. And we surmise that most of the gold had more of a ceremonial function. It was still exchanged for money, but not quite necessarily for everyday exchange. So the gold would accumulate in the temples, unlike organic donations of livestock or food. Alexander the Great seized a lot of gold from Eastern temples. So the temples had control of the gold. They could create a demand for it by accepting gold in return for their services, their blessings, and they could control the supply of money by accumulating it. Sir William Ridgway describes the monetary role of the Greek temples. The temple shrines of Delphi and Olympia, Delos, and Dodora were centers not merely of religious cult, but likewise of trade and commerce, merchants and traders taking advantage of the assembling together of large bodies of worshippers from various quarters to tempt them with their wares. The temple authorities encouraged trade in every way. They constructed sacred roads which gave facility for traveling at a time when roads were almost unknown, and placed those who traveled on them under the protection of their god. At the time of the sacred festivals, all strife had to cease, offering a breathing space for trade and commerce. Hence, the probability is considerable that the art of minting money first had its birth in the sanctuary of some god. The whole idea here is that the first bankers were priests. And this whole idea that all strife, all war had to cease during times of sacred festivals for the purpose of commerce. If you remember, if you're a fan of the graphic novel, the movie 300, this is exactly what happened when Leonidas went to the temple at Delphi. They told him to hold off on going to war with the Persians and Xerxes so that they could make their money. We can surmise that at a very early date, gold, which was used ornamentally, was accepted as donations or fees to the temples along with agricultural and animal produce. Unlike the organic donations which had to be consumed, the gold would remain. Over time, a large proportion of the existing gold would accumulate in the temples. So we can see how a lot of this book is somewhat speculative. The speculation is what makes it so interesting, though, because it's based on some solid archaeological facts. The size of the gold hoards that were accumulated, though, indicates that they were not accumulated for economic reasons, for they could never actually be used in commerce. Supply and demand had little to do with the production of precious metals, according to Francis Amasa Walker, once head of the U.S. Bureau of Statistics. So all this gold's accumulating. What do we do with it? Eventually, they start using it as money. The abundance of gold held by the temples after centuries of successful accumulation would be one reason to monetize it. Just so much artwork and ornamentation would be tasteful. Just so much might be traded for intended use as jewelry or introduced into circulation as loans. Only so much was prudent to hold in reserve. Thus, the commodity value of gold would tend to drop over the centuries as more gold was accumulated, unless the temple had deep pockets to hold back off the market, useless storage. Monetizing the gold, declaring a fixed amount equal to one cow, would alleviate the problems of gold abundance, meaning more gold can be exchanged instead of cows. Also more portable. So, but the advantage of this to the temple is that it would be difficult for others to obtain substantial amounts of gold except through the priests, and they could create a value for it by accepting it for their services, which people considered a necessary part of life. Even, for example, to pay for temple prostitutes, as described by Herodotus and Strabo for later periods. Our studies suggest this control factor is potentially more important than intrinsic consideration. The money is a question of power more than economics. So, in the ancient world, we don't see Adam Smith's invisible hand. We see priests creating a demand for gold, transforming money from, corn and cows into gold, essentially. So, something else that comes up a lot here, again, think of the graphic novel and the film 300, we see that monetary control goes from east to west. It's something that Zarlenga argues throughout this book. Remember again, the temple priests at Delphi getting bought out by Xerxes. The Persians invaded Greece. The famous battles of Thermopylae, Artemisium, and Salamis were fought, and the Delphic priesthood came near to collaborating with Persia, wrote Seltman. For 50 years after the Persians were defeated, Olympia, rather than Delphi, became the spiritual center of Greece. Zarlenga also writes about how the Midas legend arises from this region. And he writes about how the legend of King Midas, who everything he touched turned into gold. He writes, it's a warning against greed, but perhaps it's more of a monetary warning about idolizing gold. The story remains a powerful block to making a fetish out of gold. It helps us to keep from confusing the value and proper role of money has in human life with a cold, dead commodity for its own sake. So, coinage. Temples acted as the first banks. The temples often functioned like banks, loaning not only their own money, but money which had been entrusted them for safekeeping. But the shrines were extremely cautious with regards to giving out loans. So, battles occurred between the cities and the temples, between the governments and the banks. This is when the Athenians invaded and took possession of Delos island and its temple of Apollo in about 425 BC. The oracle of Apollo's temple at Delphi commanded them to leave, and they did. The temples could form powerful alliance, as in about 418 BC, when during the Peloponnesian War, the treasurers of 10 major temples were united into one board, calling itself the Treasurers of the Gods. Again, we see the first banking cartels, the first private banking cartels rising in ancient Greece. Such combinations of potentially monetary problems for the city government by moving gold or silver into or out of it. With their own local coinages, the city could disenfranchise foreign coin and metal hoards and exercise more control over their destiny. State coinage then may have resulted from a power shift, a development, or an understanding between the city-states and the international temple cults, between government and religion. The city coinages were still closely associated with the temples, with the city's mint annexed to a particular temple, as the mint was the sanctuary of Stephen of Four. And so we see the same thing right now. International banking cartels moving money around, creating major problems for different governments. And each Greek city-state had its own gold coins. But this had the same usury air, treating this money as if it was living. So Sparta, as well as Athens, started having problems once the Greek temples started switching to coinage systems. It was only necessary for an enemy to quietly withdraw some of the precious metals in circulation, or as quietly to add illegally fabricated, albeit full-weight coins to the circulation in order to produce a prolonged financial crisis and alter the entire relations of society. Changes in mining, or even in the fashion of wearing gold jewelry, could affect the money system. So before, this is according to Professor Calhoun, before the introduction of coin money, the peasant farmer borrowed commodities and repaid the loan in kind. Borrow a cow, you give a cow back. You borrow a tool, you give a tool back. Equal to sharing. And he was probably able to do so without great difficulty. But after the introduction of coin money by the priests in the temples, the situation became decidedly more difficult. He must take a loan of money to purchase his necessary supplies at a time when money was cheap and commodities dear. So you got to pay a lot of money for a few commodities. Inflation. When a year of plenty came and he undertook to repay the loan and money, commodities were cheap and money was dear. So then, after the harvest, when you've got a lot of stuff, then it's harder to get money. So we see the same problems in Greece as we saw in ancient Sumeria. Massive debt traps, massive economic collapse. Unable to get out of debt, eventually bad weather or a poor harvest would bring foreclosure on the land and even bind them into slavery. This enslavement grew to crisis proportions, and that's when Salam came to Athens' rescue with his Saisia, or shaking off burdens. Personal slavery was no longer here. It's backwards. Personal slavery was no longer allowed as a security for debts. And a lot of this momentous reform has been censored out of the records, as we have already noticed. We don't know the extent of Salam's full extent of his reforms, but we know that they happened. Farmers who had been sold into slavery abroad by those whom they owed money were brought back and returned to Athens by Salam. These laws were later studied and copied in part by Rome. So, we know a little bit more about Lycurgus' reforms. He created a form of nomisma, the Pellinors, these iron poles. And he did other stuff too. He took the land back. He divided the land up. But then his money system appears to have been based on law, where the value of money was probably determined in part by decree and mainly by the legal number of units in circulation, not by the commodity of which it was made. This would be called a numerary system, as Alexander Del Mar would call it. We would call this a fiat, or a token money system, where the total amount of money allowed into circulation is regulated by law, and where the value of these symbols serving as money depends on limiting the number in circulation. This worked for Sparta for about 3.5 centuries. Right now, in our society, there's no limit on the amount of money that the Federal Reserve can create for the banks. That's why our purchasing power keeps going down. So, real quick, we're getting to the climax of our presentation here. I want to just show you a couple of additional readings. If you're a fan of the movie 300, you gotta check out this. Plutarch's Lycurgus's life. Let's open that from here. So Plutarch was the father of biography. This comes from his work called Parallel Lives, where he's comparing different Greek and Roman figures. He's comparing like Alexander the Great to Caesar, for example. I believe he must have compared Lycurgus to Solon. But the important part to check out here is Lycurgus. So talking about Lycurgus' forms, after he took all the land back from the wealthy people and divided it all up equally, he commanded that all gold and silver coins should be called in, and only a sort of money made from iron should be current, a great weight and quantity of which was very little worth, so that to lay up 20 or 30 pounds there was required a pretty large closet, and to remove it nothing less than a yoke of oxen. With the diffusion of this money, at once a number of vices were banished from Lacedaemon, Sparta. For who would rob another of such coin? Who would unjustly detain or take by force or accept as bribe a thing which is not easy to hide, nor a credit to have, nor indeed of any use to cut into pieces? For when it was just red hot and they quenched it in vinegar, and by that means spoilt it and made it almost incapable of being worked. So because of this new fiat money, they're able to, he goes on to talk about how they're able to focus more on producing very useful things, like really high quality goods, high quality tools, cups, tables, chairs. A little bit further on, this is all great. They talk about like different Spartan customs and this, like, you know, how they ate together, how their marital customs, their sexual habits, you know, all the crazy stuff about like how they would bathe their newborn babies in wine to see if they were strong enough for military service, and if they weren't, they'd throw them off the cliff or something like that. I want to draw your attention to how this new form of money helped them with their national defense. You know, when they went to battle, their exercises were way more moderate than they were during times of peace. They trained harder during times of peace than the time of war. They were incredibly well-disciplined troops. They could move in the phalanx better than any other troops. And a lot of this had to do with the fact that they had leisure. No one was allowed to live after his own fancy, but the city was a sort of camp in which every man had his share of provisions and business set out, and looked upon himself not so much as born to serve his own ends as in the interest of his country. Therefore, if they were commanded nothing else, they went to see the boys perform their exercise, to teach them something or to learn it themselves of those who knew better. And indeed, one of the greatest and highest blessings Lycurgus produced his people was the abundance of leisure which proceeded from his forbidding them to the exercise of any mean and mechanical trade, like usury. Of the money-making that depends on troublesome going about and seeing people and doing business, they had no need at all in a state where wealth obtained no honor or respect. One other really interesting additional source material here. You check this out. It's called Denigrating Sparta. And I'm not going to go through all of this, but really interesting document for you to check out after the lecture. It talks about how the Spartans had the best food in their society and how bringing food to these regular dinners that they had was a sign of status. It's how they collected some prestige in their society. So, from a monetary perspective, and probably from a social perspective, it was probably a much better place to live in than Athens. So, this brings us to our definition of money. This experience of nomisma. Aristotle looked at the Spartan nomisma, and from there he came to argue, based on all this Greek experimentation, that money exists not by nature, not by commodities. It can't be reduced to something else, but it exists by law. It's fiat. It's issued by state authority. It is demand which holds all things together. It's a means of exchange to meet other needs. And so usury, money is sterile. It's not capable of breeding interest, but using the money system to make more money is what we define as usury, the most essential feature of capitalism. It's also interesting to note that Plato agreed with Aristotle's definition of money, and Plato favored a fiat money system for his republic. His strict monetary regulations show an awareness of a serious problem with the precious metal monies in Plato's system. So, that's where we'll leave it for now. That's what we learned from ancient Greece. And before that, the experience of the ancient Oriental monetary systems compared to the ancient Greek systems. We get a sense, this is the major takeaway. And this is what we're going to see throughout the rest of this book. We see different time periods when we use fiat money issued by the state. We see some certain periods of prosperity and certain periods of human progress. And when we do this next lecture, we'll talk about how fiat money, how nomisma helped ancient Rome build its aqueducts and all its great architecture. And we'll also take a look at how Rome's influence declined from a monetary perspective as well. So that's all I got for y'all tonight. Hope y'all dug it. Hope it all made sense. If it didn't make sense, please light this up with some comments. And again, tell Chomsky about the NEAT Act. I think that's all I got for tonight. We'll see y'all later.